Here's a story I haven't really shared before. When I was in middle school, we used to have these really awesome mushroom rings in the woods venting my house. One spring, there was one that was maybe 12 or so feet in diameter. Perfectly shaped mushrooms and a light cream color on top with brown scaling. I loved it. It was so cool. So jokingly, I said aloud, "Those are some nice mushrooms you have there, fairy folk." And no fucking lie, hand on a stack of Bibles, I heard someone say, "Thank you." There was no one around. I would have seen them if there were. So I just kinda nodded and walked back home. Out at my mom's in northern Ontario, I always come across dead birds. Usually crows, sometimes starlings or jays. The first one I ever found, I moved it to a mossy spot, left some coins with it laid gently on its body, and tucked wildflowers in its wings. No idea why, I just knew I had to do it. So, every time I came across a dead bird, which was often, I would repeat, find moss, pick flowers, lay down coins. Well, I moved to the city and stopped seeing birds, but now my mom was finding them. She'd bag them up and toss them. Bad thing. Shit started going down. She found one of her chickens impaled in a tree on a branch. A tree fell on the house. She had to shoot 2 rabid raccoons on separate occasions. The creek went rancid. I went back to visit for 2 weeks, many years later, and walking up to the house, a bird hits the window and dies. Without hesitation, I pulled coins from my pocket, set the bird to rest, and placed flowers beneath its feathers. My mom tells me whatever the fuck was happening has stopped. No chicken deaths in months. The creek has fish again and smells less like rot. The air feels lighter. Meanwhile, I find dead birds on my walk to work every other day. It followed me home. I got some. 1. Somewhere in bumfuck Georgia, driving at about 4 in the morning from our friend's house, on one of those roads that's nothing but churches and gas stations and abandoned farmhouses for miles, I see a woman on the side of the road. I'm about to pull over, because I'm the kind of stupid that stops for people on the side of the road at 4 in the morning, before I realized that the pretty lady in white didn't have legs, and was floating. And I decided, nope, and drove home and just tried to not think about it. 2. As a wee Elsie, I was staying with my godparents in rural Pennsylvania, and I offered to walk the dog, an elderly Shih Tzu named Molly. Godmom said yeah, stay off the road. Goddad, who had grown up in the area, told me, stay out of the corn. Because they lived right between 2 separate farmers' cornfields, and I was like, why would I go into the corn at 9? Don't do it. Okay. So, I'm walking the dog, staying off the road but out of the corn, and suddenly I hear a rustle. Now, there was no wind on this particular night, so that wasn't it. I hear more rustling, and I capitalize it because it's a particular kind of sound that instills fear. I look around and see a cluster of orange eyes, and I decide that Molly had done her business and it was time to go back inside. So, I race an elderly dog back to the house and burst into the house yelling, "There's something in the corn!" Goddad says, "I told you," and took a shot. I don't live in the South. Never have, hopefully never will. But my aunt does, and we visit her at least once every year. She lives in Texas, pretty close but not neighboring Houston, and during one of these trips, I went outside at night. It was my sister and I, and we got our aunt to let us use her four-wheeler to go into the field where she keeps her horses. It's a pretty big area. She likes to let her horses have their space, but I still knew how to get around the place. I was 12 and my sister was 11. As soon as we got outside, we both got a really bad feeling about the whole ordeal, but for some reason we still went. Not too long after we got out there, we started noticing pairs of glowing white eyes coming from the trees that seemed to look right at us, unblinking. There started to be more of them, until there were dozens of them. This was more than enough to scare us into getting back to the house as fast as we could, even though doing so would be turning our backs on the eyes. It was terrifying as fuck, let me tell you. We asked our aunt what they were, hoping it was wild dogs or something, but she said over and over that it wasn't, and didn't offer an explanation as to what they were. I'm seriously glad we didn't go out on foot. I was born and raised in the city. My grandparents lived in the outskirts, but then decided to move back to a small mountain town my grandmother's family used to live in. By small, I mean it had less than 20 houses, and everyone knows everyone. It's an old little place, perched on the side of the mountain, with buildings made of stones. Right under it, there are fields, and then the woods. The first time I visited, more or less 7 years ago, my grandmother was very careful to warn me not to go out when it's dark. She's the same woman who taught me about myths and legends, and told me that there are things wandering around. We don't know who they are, or what they are, but they like to stroll through the town when they know it's quiet. Usually they're calm, but sometimes they try to get people to come with them back into the woods. They make you see things, imitate noises and voices. They won't let you come back. I was skeptical, but I obeyed. Fast forward to 3 years ago. I was spending the month with my grandparents, and it was only the three of us since my family decided to stay in Rome. One day, around 9 p.m., the sun had just set. I was in the kitchen on the second floor, reading at the table, when my grandmother called me from the garden. The window was open, so I clearly heard her shout, "Can you come down a second?" It wasn't the first time it had happened. My grandmother had a dog who was pretty old and had trouble walking, so she'd call me down into the garden from time to time to help her move him back inside. But she'd never asked me to go out at night. "Is everything okay?" I yelled, still sitting at the table. "You need help?" "Can you come down a second?" she repeated. I just thought, meh, and stood up to go downstairs to the lobby and reach the garden, and I met my grandmother in the hallway. I asked her, "You don't need help anymore?" She just stared at me, so I explained that I heard her call me from the garden. "You didn't look down from the window, did you?" I shook my head, and she calmly walked into the kitchen and closed the window. "You shouldn't go out. It's dark," she told me, getting a bottle of water from the fridge, like nothing had happened. "But I heard you call—" "It's dark, Georgia." That's when I fully realized that it wasn't my grandmother who tried to get me to go out in the night. And that's why I don't fuck with the unknown. I was very young. I only had one brother at the time, and I'm currently the oldest of 4. My second brother, the third child, is 6 years younger than me, so unless that was the year my mother got pregnant, I was between 4 and 6. I don't know why we were going there, but my mother and a man I didn't know took my brother and I to the cemetery one night. I don't really know what they were doing, but we were sitting in the back. the open space in the trunk of a truck, waiting for them to do whatever it was that they were doing. We had brought shovels with us, and they walked off into the dark to do whatever it was that they were doing, and we stayed put. We were two bored kids who had not yet developed any real means of learning that the cemetery was supposed to be a creepy place. So, when we noticed a pair of small glowing dots moving around near the truck, we weren't scared, just really curious. The lights weren't very big. If I had to give an estimate, I'd say they were about the size of one of those larger cat's eye marbles. They were too far apart to be the eyes of any sort of animal, though. They floated around, but weren't going in the same direction. As a kid, I thought they were fireflies, but I've never legitimately seen anything akin to this following the incident, and I have seen fireflies elsewhere. The movements didn't match a bug, and the lights did not flicker in any sort of way. They moved very slowly, sort of like bubbles once they start to float towards the ground, but these lights never touched the floor. They would float down to eye level with us, but I could never tell how close they were, if at all, and then slowly go back up, before coming down again, and repeating the process. My brother and I were the only two to see them. Our mother and the guy that was with us probably weren't paying enough attention to catch on to their presence. Once they did whatever they were there to do, they threw their shovels next to us and got in the truck, and we were out of there a few minutes later. The lights eventually just vanished from our vision, but the lights never faded. They were just gone. It was like I blinked and suddenly they weren't there anymore. We went home and my brother and I talked about it. Again, we had been convinced that they were fireflies at the time, so really, we just wanted to see if we could try and go back to catch the pretty bugs. It was only after getting a little older, and after visiting that cemetery a few more times, that I figured out that they weren't what I thought they had been. That was the only time I'd ever seen the lights. I'm still curious about what they were. But whatever they were, I don't think they were anything dangerous. Given how I am as an adult, I think I'd have gotten that odd sense of fear if there had been anything remotely hostile about them. Listen, I don't usually add to posts, but being a superstitious person and having lived in northeastern Louisiana for upwards of 5 years, I gotta say some stuff. I grew up in a small town, not even classified as a town. It was a village, officially. We had one school from pre-K to 8th grade, then you attended the parish's high school. We had one gas station, 5 churches, and lots of empty land, cornfields, and forests. Not to mention muddy creeks and bayous. Leave the bayous be. She isn't your friend. You hold your breath over every bridge you cross. Grip the wheel a bit tighter and try to move forward as fast as you safely can. It's unspoken that you stay away from the cornfields at night. You can glance at the forest. She was the kindest. But you only spread loving glances at her, admire her, never litter, and keep your pets away from her borders. I lived in a 3-bedroom house, surrounded by the forest on 3 sides, the road in front, and a cornfield on the other side. My closest neighbor lived across the street and to the left, their house surrounded by the cornfield on 3 sides. I lost 3 dogs, all close to the cornfield and always in the center of the road, just past the yellow solid lines. The field isn't a friend and doesn't appreciate trespassing at night. I finally moved back to California, and I visit my grandparents in that house every summer. The house is a completely surreal experience at night, almost alive. I never left my bed at night, always leaving my nightstand light on and my door firmly shut. One night, though, I experienced the single most terrifying moment of my life. I forgot to leave my light on, browsing through my apps on my phone at 2 a.m., like one does who can't ever seem to go to bed at a reasonable time, when I saw something. Fae, elf, creature, I don't know. but it was tall and white, no distinguishable facial features, and wore a long black cloak. It stood in front of my door and made no moves. I get chills along the right side of my body every time I write about it, think about it, talk about it. I immediately averted my eyes from its looming figure and buried myself under the covers, silently crying and praying to whatever good thing was listening. I finally worked up the courage to stick my hand out and pull the cord to turn the light on, and it was gone. I didn't sleep at night for the next 2 days. While still living there, I would sometimes invite my friends to stay the night with me. One night, me and this girl snuck out of my window and climbed up the peach tree in the backyard that was fenced off from the forest and small meadow in front of it. We sat in the tree when we heard something in the forest moving, a very vague noise. The coyotes suddenly howling, and the trees in the forest moving. We very obviously were not welcome to look at the forest at night, to even leave the house. Fae are not ones to be crossed, not to be questioned nor insulted. Southern Fae are frightening from what I've experienced. Be respectful of the water the bayou flows. Be kind to the forest. Don't look at the cornfield. Don't be stupid. They're always watching. Speaking of shit happening in the South, I live in South Carolina, and I almost got jumped by a thing. I guess you could call it. Now, we've got a lot of trouble with coyotes, because some were released a few years ago to deal with the deer population. Deer can be a real pain in the ass around here. There are also a lot of dogs in my area. Just about every house has at least one, or the average is enough to even the distribution. And not everyone keeps them on chains, or in the house, or in fences. So what I'm saying is, what almost attacked me could have been a coyote, or a tame dog, or a wild dog, or even a mountain lion or bobcat. We've got a few of those around as well. But I don't think it was. I'm kind of a fucking weirdo, so I like taking walks at night. A friend and I would get liquored up and break into the park that's like 2 miles or so from my house. We were dumb and also horror junkies, so creepy shit was our bread and butter. But this happened way after that guy and I drifted apart, just setting up the fact that I'm a paranoid son of a bitch. But I'm not exactly frightened of weird shit in the woods at night. So, one night I was taking a long walk. I'd almost gone into town, then cut into some backwoods roads that led up and around back towards my neighborhood. I've traveled this road in cars a lot, so it's no biggie. I know the way. I was also listening to music with earbuds, which is just a bad move in general if you're walking along backcountry roads at night. But I figured, what the heck, I'll see the car headlights before it gets to me. No big deal. Well, I'd just gotten back home. I was maybe a half a mile from my door. I should also mention that I never, ever do this without a weapon of some kind. My pistol, a big fucking Bowie knife, or even just a pocket knife or walking stick. Anything I can get a good swing, stab, or shot in with. I like to be prepared. Well, ever since I got on those back roads, I kind of felt like I was being watched. Nothing too serious, just a little prickling at the nape of my neck, you know? Something that makes you walk a little faster and ignore the blisters forming on your feet. I'd probably walked about 8 or 9 miles at this point, so I turned a corner, still got that feeling, but I just passed through a fairly thickly inhabited neighborhood. I walked down the road a little ways, and then this shit happens. The shoulder dipped into a ditch on my right side, but as soon as I hit the other side of the ditch, it was woods, and given how dark it was, you couldn't see shit. I also didn't have a flashlight, because I'm a fucking genius like that. So I hear some rustling over in the fuck off woods next to me. The underbrush is so thick that you could hear a rabbit or squirrel move in it, so there was definitely something there. Knowing what I do about the animals around here, I take out my earbud on that side and look over, and as soon as I do, something breaks from the underbrush at me. I never got a good look at it. It was too dark, and as I say, this was a fuck off forest I was looking into, but something was definitely running through the underbrush at me. At me. There was no growling, no howling, no nothing. Just this gigantic noise of something running through the underbrush at me. So I whip out my knife and start screaming, "Yeah, hey, fuck off," kinda shit at it. And it stopped. Off it did fuck. However, I never heard it leave. And I stood there for at least 2 minutes, waiting for it to muster up the gumption to try something while I had a knife in my hand. It didn't, and I slowly started walking away, but something told me whatever it was had already left. Now, like say, that could have been anything, and maybe it just sat there waiting for me to leave, but that doesn't explain why it ran at me like that, or where it went, or how it left without me hearing it. When I was so keyed up, I was hearing squirrels farting 3 counties over. I maintain to this day that I ran into a thing. One of those creepy woodsy shits that just like to fuck with people. It damn sure wasn't the lizard man. And that's not even counting the other shit I've seen down here. I even woke up once to 3 shadow people standing over my bed and talking about me. I could hear their voices. Then one leaned in and got within inches of my face. I couldn't make out any details, but my, I guess, sleep paralysis broke, and I swept at it with my arm and reached on the other side of the bed and turned the light on, and there was nothing there. But they were. I fucking saw them. The South is fucking creepy, y'all. We got all kinds of bug shit monster demons running around down here. Just lock your goddamn door at night, and bring your pets in the fucking house for God's sake. And not for nothing, but it might help to have some kind of holy symbol lying around, even if your faith in it isn't all that.